how-to for you guys. And this one's going to be epic. How to make a subtractive sculpture from a big piece of foam. Okay. It could be a big piece of wood. It could be a big piece of foam. But first off, let's talk about the types of sculptures. There's two types of sculptures. One is additive. Think the Statue of Liberty. Taking all these pieces of metal, pounding them flat, building the inside skeleton, and putting the outside layer of skin on it. Boom, that's additive. Keep adding. The other one is subtractive. Subtractive is what it says, taking off. Think Michelangelo's David, that huge David sculpture. You think of Michelangelo up there on a scaffold, hitting little chunks of stone off onto the ground. This method I'm teaching you could be wood. It could be plaster, carving away from plaster. It could be stone. But I'm going to use foam because I have a big piece of foam that I bought for a commission, and then they backed out and I didn't have anything else to do with it. I had the help of Suya, one of my students, and Hannah, one of my students, and they're fantastic artists. And they do sculptures and they do shows. They're amazing people. So glad I could teach them. Anyways, thanks for their help. So as you can see here, we have this huge piece of foam. And I drew, first off, before you make something, you should obviously draw it all out. So you have a plan of what it's going to look like in the end. I also like to do little like studies, mock-ups, like use oil-based clay to make a little model of it. In this case, I only had a drawing of the profile and the front. And now, as you can see, I am carefully using a chainsaw to take off big chunks off of the sculpture. Then we use knives, sawzalls, and other things to take off finer details. Here you can see we're using X-Acto knives and other small blades. So now you can see me in the back there. I was preparing the paper clay, which in a minute we're going to cover the whole thing with. You can also see I have some great stuff, or that foam spray that squeeze it out, and the foam will cover any holes that we may have accidentally made. Now I'm in the back making up the paper clay. What is paper clay? It's three things. You got newspaper is one part, and then the other part is like Elmer's glue, white glue, or construction glue, any type of like water-based glue. And then the last one is talcum powder. Yeah, that stuff you put on your baby's butt, that white powder. You can buy it in bulk. What does the talcum powder do? Here you can see the clay. The talcum powder makes it really hard when it dries. I mean like rock hard. It's amazing. So the more talcum powder you put in, the harder it'll get. But I do about a 3-part. And the newspaper, you have to use a blender or what do you call those? KitchenAid. I have a huge industrial-sized blender mixer for like making noodles for a huge restaurant or factory. That's what I use. So I can do a huge batch all at once. But the important thing is that you get most of the water out. You see sometimes I go back there and I'm stepping on something. If you don't get all that water out, it's going to be a mushy mess. So get it out and it'll turn into, you can just hold it, and if you squeeze it, no water is going to be dripping out of it. That's about how dry you want it. Now you can see I've put in the eyes. Hannah's joined us. I'm putting in the details. With the paper clay, it's great because now it's at first it was a subtractive sculpture. If you're going to do a wood sculpture, maybe the whole thing is all subtractive. But now we're doing the kind of sculpture I like, which is additive. We're adding clay on top of the subtractive form, adding muscles, adding wrinkles, adding pimples, whatever we want to do, adding webs in between the fingers that we had made subtractively. The reason I make my own paper clay is the cost of making your own paper clay is minuscule. In a moment, you'll see I use some professional Korean paper clay to do some of the finer details on the beak and the mouth. But if you did the whole thing in that, it would be so heavy. That's another nice thing about paper clay is it's very light. It's like paper mache. You could do this sculpture in paper mache. You could have done this sculpture in fiberglass if you want to put it in the park or in front of McDonald's, like Ronald McDonald on the bench. They use fiberglass lots of times on top of foam. But do pay attention if you're doing fiberglass. Make sure you protect your foam because the fiberglass solution that you mix on top of the fibers, the glue, will melt. Some of them will melt. I'm not sure if there's any brands that won't melt, but the ones I've used will melt the foam. So you have to figure out how to protect the foam in some way. Now you can see we added hair. What I did was just buy a mop at the local hardware store and then just cut off the mop hairs, whatever you call it. And for the eyes, I used 2 light bulbs. I recycled 2 light bulbs that were clear. And I broke off the back end and then kind of used a glue gun to support the cracked areas, but it still had half a circle in the front. And then I painted the eyes inside the light bulb, so it looks cool. It looks really glassy and like real eyes, but and the texture is completely different than the body, and it's really shiny. Looks like we got a few pube hairs going. We got the feet looking better. And now it's all subjective, like add whatever details you want. Paper clay is great. It's super popular in Asia. I never even heard of it in America. I don't know if they started selling it there yet. But as you can see, it looks like Mitzi, my daughter, joined the crew. As you can see, we're just adding more and more details. And that's why I personally like additive better than subtractive sculpture is sometimes with subtractive, you accidentally take off too much. Okay, here you can see the Korean paper clay. It is much heavier and very expensive. Like one little cube is, I don't know, not that thick. It's like $5. I wouldn't recommend covering an entire sculpture with it. It also cracks much easier than homemade paper clay. Other things I've done to stretch out the paper clay to make it lighter is to add the styrofoam shavings on the floor right into the paper clay. So instead of a 3-part, I also add the foam in there, and then it lightens up the paper clay even more. So that's an idea that you guys can play around with. Now you can see touching up, adding more details, more wrinkles and whatnot. And yeah, that's basically it. I prefer additive the whole time because I find it much more freeing. I don't like having to protect myself in the future. Kind of like with watercolor, you have to leave the white paper, and if you accidentally paint over the white paper, start over again. That's probably why I have a problem with watercolor painting. I love to be able to add opaque white on top of whatever I want after. So yeah, I don't like being confined to the method. I like to just do whatever. Stick this to that and that to this. Anyways, that's, yeah, more details. In a second here, it's going to skip a huge, I can't find where we painted it, but when you're doing a big sculpture, it's much easier to use a spray gun. There you go, boom, oops. Sprayed it really fast, so fast you didn't even see me. And this is Suzuki helping now, another one of my students. So Suzuki with this cool purple hair is spraying the details. A it's good to spray a big sculpture because it's so much faster. When you're using a brush, you gotta get it in. If you don't have an airbrush, you buy spray paint. And if you don't want to do that and you just really want to paint, you need to dilute the paint mixture way down, add tons of water, and then it can go into the little crevices and yeah, finish the paint. After you're done, if you want it to have a gleamy look, you could use Damar varnish or just do a clear coat on the outside. That'll also protect the paint. I've had students do clear coat on a paper clay sculpture, just spray it like 4 or 5 times, and they put it outside, and it stayed good for like 5 years. So this one lady did a bunch of sculptures and put them at the library, and they looked great even with a hurricane blowing through. So there you have it. Subtractive sculptures done professionally and start to finish. Hope you enjoyed it. Next time I'll do more of an additive sculpture demo. Well, tell me if you want to see that and then I'll do it. Anyways, like and subscribe. And I'm Robert Fuerer, your creative mentor, signing out. Peace.